limits on this process? Are there any time limits? Is that something we should be discussing here? Because you talk about the 18-year transmission line. That's unacceptable, particularly in this day and age. Should we be talking about perhaps putting limits on times and steps so that there's a foreseeable end to the process?
I think that's definitely something that we ought to look at. When you look at FLIPMA Section 202, as was already mentioned, is everything is very, when it comes to things like land swaps, it's very prescriptive. 202 is not, and there's not a whole lot of language, and yet it's a very impactful section of code. And so those kind of limits might make sense. I think it also might make sense to figure out how it is we can get meaningful involvement, as has already been said, with those on the ground. And maybe that's the answer to, if there's currently a lack of staffing, maybe we can look at those folks with the local
work tends to expand to fill the time available, and if the time available is unlimited, it's going to be a long process. So I hope you would provide some suggestions to the committee on where we might be able to look for some time limitations that would improve the uncertainty surrounding the process. Mr. Sheehan, you used an important term, and I think this is sort of an undercurrent of this hearing, regulatory whiplash. And part of the problem is that the Congress is not being very specific about what it wants. And therefore, it leaves tremendous discretion to whatever administration it is, and you go from one to the other, and the whole world turns upside down. Is one way that we can address this by being more specific in terms of FLIPMA and what the criteria are, so Congress isn't basically abdicating its entire responsibility in this area to the executive?
Thank you, Senator King. Certainly, it's worth considering. I think that's why Chairman Lee asked for this hearing today. Do we need to do more? Attorney General Brown mentioned a moment ago, but when we look at Section 202, I mentioned in my remarks, there's only about 2 pages of guidance for 245 million acres of land. There's a little bit more in there. It talks about a congressional process and how they could look at amending these actions. But essentially, 202 says 3 things. It says coordinate with state, local, and tribal governments. Try to use their planning efforts where you can, and prioritize areas of critical environmental concern. That's the guidance from Congress, in a nutshell, in Section 202 of a 71-page law. And everything beyond that has been crafted through rules. Everything's been crafted through internal guidance, policy handbooks by the BLM, and we get where we get.
That leads to the problem of executive overreach, because there are no boundaries. So again, I would ask all of you for some homework to suggest to us how 202 could be amended to narrow what the criteria are and what the more specifics are, so that we could get policy on a more timely basis that's more predictable and more resilient. I think one of the problems you've all identified is uncertainty. And it takes so long, and you don't know what the result is going to be. So I would ask you to provide us with some suggestion as to that's the business we're in here is lawmaking, as to how this law could be more definitive in order to provide better guidance to the process, which will hopefully produce better and more resilient results, so that we don't have what you characterized, I think, quite adequately as regulatory whiplash. My final comment, Mr. Sheehan, is I was concerned that our white-tailed deer don't seem to be among your constituents of the deer species that you mentioned. And
everyone in the east can have the white-tail. We'll take our mule deer in the west.
All right, that's fine.
See how it all works out. But thank you for that.
I think, and I come at this as someone who has no BLM land in their state. And so I'm looking at it just from the point of view of good policy going forward, and hope that you can help us with that. Thank you all for your testimony. Thank you, Senator Barrasso.
Senator Barrasso.
Thanks, Mr. Christensen. I want to just